Welcome back to Business Today. Now, let cash disbursement to government ministries, departments and agencies remains a huge challenge amidst failure by the taxman to hit revenue targets. This according to the National Government Spending Fiscal Report. Earlier on, I spoke to Noah Wamalwa from the Institute of Economic Affairs on how the government utilizes its resources.
To collect of us in terms of revenue vis-a-vis the actual revenue that we realize. And we see this is especially in the first quarter of the year. It improves as we go to the fourth quarter. But mainly it is we think it's due to poor planning, because it is not a one-off issue. It's an issue that has been recurring over the years. From 2016-17, you see that gap, and that gap has been growing.
So when we have that gap growing, where you're targeting so much and what you're actually collecting is very little, the first question is why? Is it the status of the economy that we are under that is causing this particular situation of us not reaching our targets?
Yes. Now, that gap is actually, it's estimated to be around 200 billion. We are missing a target of 200 billion. And we think it's a structural issue in our economy. And we find that by looking at the trends of the tax revenue to GDP over time. So this trend has been going down. From 2016-17, it was 17%. And currently, within the first 3 quarters, quarter 1, 2, and 3 for 2020-21, it is 12%. So that's a decline of about 5 percentage points, while the target is about 18%. So it means that the GDP is growing relatively faster compared to our revenue, which means that investments that we've been making in our economy are not in more productive areas that will unlock revenue generation. So you find huge investments, for example, SGR, that are not resulting in higher returns in terms of revenue. Then this leads to low revenue performance relative to our GDP. Missing our revenue targets has had negative impact on our budget implementation. So we have revisions of the budget, both on the revenue side and on the expenditure side. But then we see that more of the revisions are happening on the revenue side, but expenditure is not revising as much. It's not being revised as much. So the shortfall is compensated through borrowing. So we are missing our revenue targets, and we are borrowing more to fill that gap. Yes.
And
so
we are not looking at the expenditure end of things.
Yes. So there is ambition, high ambition to spend more. So in as much as we are revising downwards the expenditure, it's not being revised at a higher magnitude compared to the revenue. So that difference between the expenditure and revenue, it is compensated through borrowing. And you also see that in terms of our debt, it has risen sharply. Yes.
Yes. Yes. And that brings in the debt discussion that we've had, many times in the country, where we are, debt distress level. We've even seen, people coming to help the IMF, stepping in and saying we need to relook at our taxation regime.
Yes. Now, according to IMF assessment, a report that was released April last year, it shows that our overall risk distress level is high. It moved from medium in the previous year to now high debt distress, which means the likelihood of financing our debt without any challenges is low. Yeah, we are likely to face challenges in servicing our loans, mainly because the debt servicing charges has risen sharply due to rise in the overall debt level. And also the short maturity period of these loans has also been near. That's why we have very high debt distress. And given that the revenue level is falling, it means that out of, for example, in this period from quarter 1 to quarter 3, 2020-21, out of every 100 shillings that we collect, 55 of it, of the ordinary revenue, is going towards servicing the debt, which is high, which means that the flexibility part of our budget has reduced because mandatory payments, given that the debt is one of the mandatory payments, has increased. It then reduces the flexibility of the budget.
Looking now, let's just step back a little bit now to the actual disbursement of money by the exchequer. The trends that we're seeing, I mean, when are we releasing the money? Is the money released in time?
We have a challenge in terms of disbursement of revenues. And this is due to the fact that we have shortfalls in the revenues. And the effect is much more pronounced in quarter 1 and quarter 2. So much of the funds are received in quarter 4, and it's much more worse when you look at the development side. For example, from 2016-17 all the way to 2020-21, on average, just about 12% is received in quarter 1. That is, when you compare to the optimal amount, about 25% in quarter 1. So there's a difference of about 13 percentage points. But then in quarter 4, you find that a lot is received, about 30% of all the revenues are received in quarter 4 on development side. So that means a lot of revenues are received late in the year. So given that a lot of funds have been received late in the year, it affects the budget implementation. Given that you have less time to procure, to plan, and to spend, that leads to challenges by the MDS, ministries, departments, and agencies to spend this money according to their budget plans. And we see this even more in sectors such as health. And this is when you connect between the disbursements and then the implementation, you find that the reason why we have low absorption rate in the health sector is due to late disbursement of funds. The expenditure should be within the fiscal year. So any amount that has not been utilized has to be reappropriated afresh in the new financial period. That is.
Well, that is the latest in terms of, using our budget.